Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a style that honestly, I'm not 100% sure what to expect. I've had a couple and they tend to be most akin to strong ales, but this specifically we're jumping in today is a barrel-aged version of an American ale. This specific beer is yet again from Drake's Brewing Company, and this one's called Headzo. Clocks in at 18.5% ABV. It has been aged in both port and bourbon barrels. Drake's Brewing Company is, of course, based in San Leandro, California. So first thing first, starting with the label art, it's very cool looking. It's got this kind of black matte with red foil kind of just abstract splotches all over it. It looks really, really neat. Honestly, 18.5. This is among the highest ABVs I've ever reviewed on this channel. I mean, that's like barley wines would struggle to get into that ABV range. So most American ales I've had that have been bigger like that, the most akin style that's readily available you can find is a strong ale. And really, I mean, it almost seems like an offshoot of a strong ale style. That's such a high ABV. But anyway, a little bit of wax on there. Let's see if we can get a good grip, get it off. Yeah, we did. All right. Oh, immediately upon cracking, that bourbon is jumping right out of that bottle, that tiny opening in that neck, right out to me. We're using our all-purpose Sam Adams glass today. Let's get this poured right in. Oh, yeah. That's got a significantly lighter color than I was expecting. I was expecting a darker brown, but it's very light, almost ambery in appearance. I'll get that back down. Yeah, visually it's very caramel color. Very, very much an amber caramel colored beer. A little lighter than I expected. So far, visually it is falling in the range of what you would see typically on a strong ale. They can kind of run in that caramelly to a little darker brown. So that's why I'm thinking that classification is probably pretty close. Now, camera's probably not picking this up at all. It's got very tight, very fine champagne-like bubbles, very slowly moving through here. So you'll notice it didn't really form that much of a head at all. Very thick, high ABV, not really a ton of immediate active carbonation. So it's just got a little bit of cling on the edge of the glass. But let's get right up for a proper sniff. Oh yeah, that smells very nice. So you can very distinctly pick out the bourbon. It smells like bourbon with overtones of caramel and toffee and vanilla. But then there's this underlying port barrel aroma coming out of this as well. I am a big fan of port as well as beer. That's a fortified wine. We've talked about this just a few episodes ago. And port has a very rich, and it's got a slight sweetness to it in tawny port styles, which is probably the most common. And it's got just a ton of flavor. It looks like wine, but it tastes nothing like it. It's really an aperitif, kind of a dessert little thing you drink in small portions. The aroma is coming off very, very clearly. It's got this underlying sweetness and richness to it that's kind of pairing with these bourbon overtones. I'm not really getting any suggestion of any hoppy notes off of this at all, and a little bit of maltiness from that malt bill. 18.5, it's obviously got a lot in there to get the ABV up that high in that range. So let's just jump right in and see what this one's about. Oh, that is intense flavor. Intense flavor. Ooh, that's delicious. Very complex. The development of flavors is really taking me on a ride here. This is one that's going to take a few sips to really pick it all out. There is a lot happening in this beer. Very bold, very pungent. I could tell you, before I start to pick out and describe what I first got, a first thing of note is there is only a subtle underlying booziness to it, just a little bit. It's got a very nice warming sensation, which you would expect at 18.5% ABV on any drink, beer or otherwise. But there is this little sweetness that comes up front. It's almost honey-like in the way it presents itself, and very, very nice. So upon swallowing, you get that warming, you get that immediate burst from the barrel. The bourbon and the port are really 50-50 in tandem. They come on right up front and distinctly different flavor profiles. So yeah, your bourbon, you've got your kind of brown sugar, molasses, caramel, toffee, vanilla. The port side is really where that sweetness, I think, is coming from on the front of this beer. It's got these honey overtones that are probably really mostly coming from the malt bill, but there's this underlying sweetness, this succulent, almost candied fruit quality that comes through. That's coming from the port barrel, no question about it. That's very distinct and commensurate with port, and it pairs very well with bourbon. Totally different kind of spectrums of flavor profiles, but together in the same beer, it absolutely is working for me. In terms of what else was coming after that, it was a big rush of flavor up front, and it just continued to intensify. And then there's that little bit of malt that comes in after all of that intensification and layer upon new flavors that were popping in and out. So in tandem with all what you would expect from the barrels, I was getting buttered popcorn, I was getting apricots, I was getting peaches, candied peaches. So there's really a lot happening in this flavor profile, and they're kind of coming one after the next, after the next, after the next, after the next. So they've all kind of come in, then you start getting that underlying maltiness, and then all the flavors are just melding together, and they're holding a very high level of intensity. I can tell you the finish on this is quite long. It is still lingering on my palate, and very clearly I can taste independent kind of flavor profiles coming through. This is a big beer packed full of flavor, and it's absolutely delicious. I'm going to jump back in for body and mouthfeel, explore this flavor a bit more, see if there's anything else that comes on second sip. The body on this may surprise you. It's medium light. It is really not heavy at all. It may have a very high ABV, but it's not a heavy beer. Mouthfeel, it's got a little bit of resistance, but nowhere near what you would expect. I would say it's almost the most akin in body and mouthfeel to just a standard IPA. It's got a lot of fermentables in there, so there's a lot of malt that went in to make it, so it does give it a little substance, but this is not a heavy or chewy beer at all. Very surprising. So on second sip, the intensification of these flavors came in again exactly in the same order. I'm just paying really careful attention here, see if there's any new flavors that pop out on me. Fig, that is definitely in here. There's almost a little suggestion of this cinnamon-like quality mixed with, say, maybe orange peel. Even though this is not a spice beer, these barrels imparting what they're imparting on top of this big ABV and this big malt bill, it's really got a ton of nuance, a ton of flavors that just keep popping in and out. Almost on the end of the finish now, I didn't pick this up on first time. There's almost this candied apple quality that's coming through on the end and mixed with like caramel. So almost like a caramel apple on the back end as the intensity of flavor is starting to back off. Very, very delicious beer. This is big, it is bold, it is absolute intensity of flavor. I would say this is equally on par with the level of, say, the complexity, intensity of a barley wine or an oat wine or a wheat wine. It is that big. This is not a beer for the faint of heart. This is for people that love really big, bold, intense flavors, layers of complexity. That's who they brewed this for, and what a treat. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, count my scores. When we come back, I'll get this beer ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. So this is Drake's Brewing's Headzo. This is what they classified on the label as an American ale. It's basically a strong ale. This was port and bourbon barrel aged, 18.5% ABV. Drake's Brewing is based in San Leandro, California. So starting with the aroma, as you might expect on an 18.5% ABV double barrel aged beer, the aroma was absolutely massive. The instant I got it cracked, even just out of this tiny opening on the bottleneck, 2.5 feet away from me, massive aromas. And as soon as I got up on it, poured in the glass, tons of bourbon, all the characters you expect to find there, tons of port, all the characters you expect to find there, and this underlying really nice maltiness to it. Very, very intense, pungent aroma that smelled amazing, Aroma does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the taste, I wasn't exactly sure what to expect on this beer, but man, it was just absolutely delicious. The bourbon barrel and the port barrel each had their own voice, with all of their distinct underlying traits coming through perfectly. Nice maltiness, a little bit of sweetness, slight suggestion of booziness, though way less than you expect on an ABV this high. And overall, just a really well put together beer, packed with layers of flavor. Taste for me gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the body on this beer was way less robust than I expected for a beer in this ABV range, and certainly for a strong ale. It really was below average in that regard. Not to detract from it, but it is what it is. The body only gets a 3 out of 10. For the mouthfeel, very similar to the body. It was such a big beer, of such a big beer style, but it had such limited resistance. There was really no discernible weight or heft or resistance or thickness to either the body or the mouthfeel. And yet again here, it was below average. The mouthfeel only gets a 3 out of 10. For the finish on this beer was exceptionally long. This is a big, bold beer packed with big, intense flavors. This was barley wine, oat wine, wheat wine territory, to be certain, and the finish on this was exceptionally long, with layers of flavor lasting minutes after each sip. Finish does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the head and retention, this was not a super carbonated beer. What did come through was very light, champagne-like, but it was not particularly active. It looked way thick in the glass, even though the mouthfeel wasn't very thick or viscous at all. But the head and retention, it did okay. It did below average, certainly for the style, but it wasn't completely flat. Head and retention gets a 3 out of 10. For the appearance, this was textbook. For an American ale, strong ale, hybrid, whatever you want to call it, it was right in the Goldilocks zone. Rather exactly what I expected to see. The appearance does get a 10 out of 10. For the balance on this beer was absolutely top notch. Every bit of the barrels that they used came through in the flavor profile. The underlying subtleties of the flavors all had their own voice. They intermixed perfectly. The balance was absolutely stellar. It does get a perfect 10 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible, subjectively, I loved this beer. I've never had an American ale, strong ale quite like this one. It was huge. It was nearing on barley wine territory. I absolutely loved it. Gets a perfect 10 out of 10 from me. Finally, is an example of the style. So, this beer lost quite a lot of points in multiple different categories. But in the grand scheme of things, they aren't categories that really detract from what the style actually is. And I absolutely had to give this a perfect score in this category. So, example of style does get a 10 out of 10, which brings the total score on Drake's Brewing Company's Headzo to a 79 out of 100. So the score in and of itself is certainly well above average, but this is one of the beers I felt the most compelled to mention this as an asterisk, an aside. The ratings are what the ratings are. The separate categories are what they are. But if I were going sheerly based on subjective impulses, how much I enjoyed what I got, this is absolutely top tier. So sure, 79, subjectively, this would be nearly perfect for me. Big, bold beer, full of pungency. It just, specific categories were what they were compared to what you normally get for the style. But make no mistake, this is absolutely top tier beer. I absolutely loved it. If you're a fan of high ABV, flavorful, bold, intense beers, this is 100% one I highly recommend you seek. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, just turn on the notifications, hit that bell right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.